Thanks, folks. I guess a lot of what I was going to talk about has already been covered in terms of putting water out, etc., etc. So I guess what I can do is give people a bit of a rundown on what we've been doing in terms of research work, and then what was going on with the regions in the valley and sort of in the general area before the fires hit, and then kind of what we can do post-fire. So I'm a researcher at ANU. We work on Regent Honeyeater, swift parrots, a few other challenging species. Sure, a lot of you probably already know this. What we do for Regents is we try to implement this really rigorous monitoring program. So we've got about 150 sites in the valley. When we find birds, we follow up. We monitor really closely their nesting. We look at things like how many males there are, how many females there are. We put colour bands on the subset of the birds. And so we've been doing this for 5 years now, so we've got a pretty good idea of when there's birds in this area, where they'll be, and we're starting to try and implement some sort of targeted recovery action, so things like suppressing noisy miners. This year we were trying to implement nest protection measures, so putting things like tree collars up, managing currawongs around nest sites. So between September and November, so just before the fires came through, we had about 30 birds in the valley. Most of the birds were actually in the north, in the Bogey area and around Home Hills, north of the National Park. We had a few birds around Glen Davis, and we had 2 pairs in Kurunguba, down near the campground. So there was an active nest there that was unfortunately predated by a brush-tailed possum before the fire passed through. So as far as we're aware, even though we know there were approximately 30 birds in and around the valley, we're fairly confident that we didn't actually lose any active nests to the fire as far as we know. I mean, there could be birds in other areas that we didn't find, and certainly the Green Wattle Creek fire in the Burrowing is a big worry as well, because we know that areas that we've had birds nesting down there in 2017 has been quite badly burnt by the looks of it. So, and unfortunately the fires meant that we couldn't actually get back in there and do our second round of surveys in November before the fire passed through. So in terms of the impact of these fires, we've been talking, this is really still early days because obviously we can't get into a lot of these places to kind of assess the damage. But some really crude analysis that we've been doing with DPI, the New South Wales government. We've plotted, so every location we've found nests in the whole of the state in the last 5 years, so that's about 150 nests. What we've done is basically buffered each one by a kilometre, so just a simple radius, and looked at what proportion of those buffers have been affected by fire so far, and the figure comes out about 47%. So that probably to some extent overestimates the impact of the fires, because as Tiffany was saying, that Regents are really dependent upon these kind of low-lying areas, areas where there's river, where there's water, where there's yellow box, and so even though we find large areas have burnt, the slopes have burnt, a lot of the critical breeding habitat probably hasn't been lost yet. Having said that, obviously a lot of the areas these birds would disperse through after breeding, we don't really know where they go. They're too small to track. There's obviously probably less than 400 left. So areas where they would disperse through to spend the winter, say on the coast, has probably gone up. So we can't really quantify what impact the fires have had on the Regent Honeyeaters until probably 2 or 3 years down the track, because even if we sort of come back and do our next round of surveys in August and September, we find that there's birds here, the number of birds is really variable between years anyway, and that's obviously contingent upon the drought, how much nectar there is, how much blossom there is, and so to try and gauge how many birds we might have lost as a result of these fires is going to be really hard. So all we can do really is try and, in the short term, go out and assess the damage to breeding sites, and then in the longer term try and look at things like continuing the habitat restoration, putting water out, maybe managing noisy miners in the valley, and that's really it. Possums, well, as well as you can manage possums, it's having found, we tried it this year, and we put collars on some river oaks down in Kurunguba, and that nest was still predated by possums. So it's not as easy as it looks, unfortunately.
Possum coats.
Yeah, so I guess I'll leave it at that for the moment, and all I'll say is that this coming week, ANU will probably try and organise a meeting with maybe with National Parks, New South Wales Government. We've been approached by the Threatened Species Recovery Hub, AWC as well, the Australian Wildlife Conservancy. So there's a lot of people that have kind of gained more of an interest in the conservation of the species as a result of these fires. So what we're kind of hoping for is in the longer term we can get some more funding and do more large-scale work. And so, yeah, if it hasn't taken out half the population somewhere where we don't know where they are, then it could kind of work in the species' favour in the longer term if it makes people more aware of what's going on and what we can do. So,
so you know, you said that they migrate to the coastal areas. I actually didn't know that.
Yeah.
So does that mean that there might be areas that have been burnt out the coast that we should be trying to put food for them and
No.
make it livable?
So Regents are really, so if people don't know, we class them as nomadic, so they kind of wander around the landscape. They can travel hundreds of kilometres in search of food. So even if there's areas that have burned, Regents are quite happily travel a long distance to find somewhere where they can feed. And I think at the moment there's quite a lot of blossom in the Western Sydney area. We had two nests there as well this year, so one in Mulgoa and another one in south of Maruta. So a lot of those areas have got some decent blossom at the moment. There could be more birds around there. We just don't know. But I wouldn't, sort of supplementary feeding for Regents and other honeyeaters isn't really going to be a thing that we can do, unfortunately. So, but water certainly is, and if we're going to find birds in the valley, so this photo up on the wall, I think was taken less than a week ago.
Yeah.
This was a guy on Home Hills Road who had a bird come into his bird bath. So, if you're not familiar with Regents, if you're not familiar with them, you don't know what they sound like, by far and away the best way of finding birds in your properties will be that they come into bird baths. So even if you can do something like put a camera trap out, so I know Sue's done this before, found a Regent at her bird bath. And any sightings obviously in the next year, 2 years are going to be really important. So we know that there are still birds in the valley as of a week ago. So yeah, just keep your eyes peeled around anywhere you put water out.
Any special spots that you think we should put bird baths for the Regents?
It depends. Are we talking about the whole valley? Because I was under the impression
Oh no,
that
just on any given property, kind of an area.
not really. Somewhere there's some cover.
Cover.
Yeah, just some shrubs. Yeah, that would be the best thing.
And I know there's tree plantings, but can we, for long term, should we be thinking about if we want to plant some natives, something?
Yeah, for sure.
Certain natives, what we can encourage in our own property.
Yeah, so even if you don't want big plantings that offered by BirdLife, you can still. One of the things that I'd be really keen to do, especially with the dieback as well, is Regent honeyeaters kind of. They depend upon these trees that are essentially paddock trees because they've been cleared so much. So yellowbox, large parts of the valley have just got single, or small numbers of yellowbox trees. And so, if you've got a bare paddock and you want some shade stock shade for your stock or whatever it might be, it's still really valuable to just go out and plant individual yellowbox trees or mugger ironbark trees that just put a small guard around them to stop them being grazed by macropods or livestock or whatever, and
And in case you don't know, the Katie Valley Land Care has got a project running with LLS that will do just this, so get in touch with us
Yeah.
if you want to put some on your property.
Yeah. So we're not talking, huge numbers of trees. What we're trying to go for is quality over quantity. So, yeah, you could put 5 paddock trees of yellow box in your land. That'd be amazing.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ross. Round of applause.